Because I've worked in IT for so many years, I've seen a lot of ports on computers and systems come and go and change. Some of them became quite standard. Some of them were here for a little bit and disappeared. I've come across a lot of people who don't understand the language we use when we're talking about things like display interfaces. When you're connecting a monitor to your laptop or to your desktop computer, what kind of cables do you use? For the most part, people have standardized on HDMI. Most people know what an HDMI cord is. In fact, a lot of computers came with an HDMI port. Some that were older might have a micro HDMI or a mini HDMI port, but for the most part, if you have HDMI or you have a TV, you know what HDMI looks like. A little bit like a trapezoid, and most modern monitors will have an HDMI port on them. Another interface you might have come across or seen is a display port. It looks a little bit like an HDMI, but it's only squashed on one side. The other side is square. DisplayPort is not HDMI, and it's not going to fit in an HDMI port. Please don't try to put a cord into a port that it won't fit into. That's going to break a lot of things, and it's just not going to work. When we talk about monitor types and display ports, you're going to hear the older or legacy cords like VGA or DVI. This is something that even my own agents haven't interacted with a lot because they haven't worked in IT as long as I have, and I've worked with AV interfaces pretty much my whole life. VGA and DVI are something that I know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as I mention it. A VGA cord or port will typically be blue, and it's this one that has all these little dots in it. This is VGA. DVI is typically white, so the cords might have a white tip, and it's also going to have pins inside of it, but it has some pins, and then there's usually like a little flat piece at the end. DVI actually had two different standards, DVI-D, which carried a digital interface, and then DVI-I. For the most part, modern devices, so things that have been built in the last 10 years, aren't going to have multiple different DVI ports. There's just going to be one DVI port, and pretty much every DVI cable you can find is going to fit it, unless you have one of those really old ones. Thankfully, most things now are standardizing on a USB-C. If you have a phone, you're probably used to this port because a lot of phones now do charge with the USB port. The other cool thing about the USB-C port, Apple's Thunderbolt proprietary technology is now in a USB-C like port. So you can use a USB-C cable on an Apple Thunderbolt port. This is really good news because Apple for a long time would put in mini DVI or mini VGA ports on their devices or a mini display port, so you had to get an adapter for everything. But now USB-C has become a lot of the standard. Most laptops are going to have a combination of cables, but they will come with a USB-C port, which is a mini display port. When we talked about the DisplayPort cable, the one that looked like an HDMI cable but was flat on one side, these USB-C cables can also carry the same signal most of the time from most modern devices. But it's important that you don't use just any USB-C cord. If you go to Amazon and you buy a cheap USB-C cord, it might not work to charge your phone as a fast charging device, for example. One of the great things about standardizing on a standard like USB-C is most people are going to have these cords and you don't have to go out and buy a special dongle or a new special cord. One of the bad things is there's going to be a lot of cords like this that just aren't going to be able to carry the signal that you want or the speed that you want. Unfortunately, it's very hard to figure out which cables can and can't carry the signal without reading the reviews. So you might want to read the reviews if you're looking for something to do a specific job and search to see if someone mentioned it working or not working. So you have to make sure that you're getting a cable that is capable of carrying the display or the fast charging, whatever you need. One of the great things about cables like the DisplayPort, if you got a DisplayPort cable, you're pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be able to carry the digital signal that you need it to carry. Even HDMI cords are not all made the same. You can get an HDMI cable and it might not carry as good of signal as some other HDMI cables. For most people, it's not going to make a difference. There's certain things that some HDMI cables, some cheaper HDMI cables just cannot carry. So you have to be careful to make sure you get the correct HDMI cable. There is a reason that some standard cables out there have just been standard because it's difficult to mess them up. Coaxial or your cable TV cable that just looks like that one little pin in the middle is still very much a standard, and it's been around a long time. It's kind of hard to mess those up. You can mess them up. I have seen some that are messed up. Hopefully this is helpful to you if you've ever been caught in that situation where you're looking for a cable and you don't know what it's called. You can always look it up online to see the different types of cables. It's important to understand current modern technology is only going to have a few different display cables for your computer device. VGA, often blue, has just little pins inside. It's going to be the lowest quality cable out there right now for most computer hardware. DVI is often white, also has pins inside, but you have a little flat one on the end there. It's going to be a little better, and it's capable of carrying a digital signal. HDMI is probably what you're used to if you've used or had to hook up a TV or a monitor in the last decade or so, as this is pretty much the new standard. This can carry a full digital signal, and it can also carry audio. DisplayPort is another standard that's very similar to HDMI. Unfortunately, it's very similar in the looks as well. Important that if you have a DisplayPort port, that you're getting a DisplayPort cable. Don't get an HDMI cable and try to shove it into this port because it won't work. And then finally, USB-C, about as close to a standard for everything as you can get right now. USB-C or Thunderbolt, whatever you want to call it, the port looks the same. So as long as you have a cable that's capable of carrying that digital signal, this will get you your digital signal, your charging signal, your display signal, even potentially your audio signal, depending on what you're connecting. And chances are you already have one of these laying around your house that came with a phone or came with your laptop. That will work for a lot of other things. Hopefully now you know some of what display interfaces are out there, where to find them, and what to call them. So when you tell that IT guy in your life, I need a new cable to go from my computer to my monitor, and they say, what kind of ports do you have available? You're going to be able to say something a little more than the one with the pins. Hopefully now you're able to say a little more than the one that looks like a smiley face.